I've been telling a series of stories over recent weeks. This is the 39th of them. I'm telling stories that illustrate some of the memorial stones in my life, the Ebenezer moments, the moments when I knew that God had helped me or taught me something new that shaped me, that became part of the essence of who I am. If you're interested, you could look back and see some of the earlier stories. Today's story is one of my favourite stories from recent times. It's all about bicycles and adventure, which are two of the blue flames in my life, and I'll explain what I mean by that phrase as I go through this story. I've cycled bikes all my life. I had a newspaper round when I was a kid, and so for years I went out early in the morning on my bike. I cycled into school every day. So pretty much every day of the year I rode a bike. I finally got a nice bike when I was at university. A friend gave me a second-hand road bike. It was a lovely bike, and I got into cycling longer distances then. At the weekend I would visit different friends at other universities, and I got used to cycling 100, 200 kilometres over the weekend. And then one summer, a group of 8 of us cycled from Land's End in England up to John O'Groats in Scotland, the length of the United Kingdom, about 1,000 miles. It was a great adventure. Soon after we got married, we moved to a new house, and pretty much in the first week living in this house, both our bikes, which were chained up outside the back door, were stolen. This was a sad moment. But thankfully we had insurance, and with the insurance we were able to buy 2 new bikes. My first new bike I'd had in my life, and my bike was a Giant. It was one of the early mountain bikes. It had no suspension, it was a hardtail, but it was a lovely bike. It was strong, it was quite heavy, but because of its strength and it went on forever. I had it for pretty much the next 19, 20 years. And I cycled that bike all over England. I had it in South Africa, in Mozambique, I've had it here in Spain. So in its lifespan, those 20 years, I cycled many thousands of miles on that bike. I loved it. I explored the hills of Cape Town, the beaches, the sugarcane fields of Mozambique. I cycled everywhere on that bike. It was a beautiful old girl that I loved. But when we moved here to Spain, the hills and the trails of Spain were beckoning, but my poor old bike really was too heavy and too old, and I really struggled on the trails. This really came home to me. I think it was late 2013. A friend of mine who lives in Asia invited me to cycle with him. He paid for a ticket for me to fly out to Thailand. It was a fantastic time. We had about 9-10 days cycling in Thailand and Cambodia. Absolute exhilarating time. Just the clothes I was cycling in, one change of clothes for the evening, a passport, my wallet, and that's pretty much all I carried. And we just cycled. We travelled around new places, new sights, new sounds, an explosion of newness. All my senses alive. It was wonderful. Cycling shoulder to shoulder with an old friend in a new place. A real adventure. When I got back to Spain and really wanted to go out on the trails, having ridden this nice bike that I'd hired in Thailand, I really knew I needed a new bike. But at that point, to be honest, I couldn't really prioritise buying a bike, even if I had the finances for it. We had so many other needs at that point. We just relocated to a new country. All the costs of that, costs of putting the girls into school, all these different things meant a new bike was impossible. But it was a dream. I really wanted to have one. And then one day I cycled into work and I ended up bringing the bike home by car. So the bike was on the roof of the car, on the roof rack, and we stopped on the way home at a shop. We made the mistake of pulling in under the roof of the shaded parking area outside a supermarket. It knocked the bike off the roof rack, it hit the ground very hard, it smashed the derailleur, the bike was pretty buckled. It was obvious that my faithful old steed was dead. It was time to bury it. This was a sad moment. I'd had that bike for 20 years and I really loved it. But thankfully, a really good friend in the UK heard about this, and it literally immediately on Facebook sent a message saying, "Tim, I'd love to buy you another bike." This is amazing, amazing. He said, "I've got £400. Why don't you do some research and find a really good second-hand bike? You'll get good value for your money with that." So I did some research online, I found a bike, and I bought a bike for that £400, and it was a lovely, as good as new mountain bike. Beautiful. This was in the early spring of 2014. I spent several weeks on that bike, cycling every trail. I was loving it. Everywhere I went, I was discovering new routes and exploring the hills behind our house. It was fantastic. I loved this bike. And then in April 2014, we had the chance with some other people to do a 6-week leadership development course as a couple. It was a wonderful season. We loved it. It was a good time of reflecting back on our past decade in ministry, on looking at our leadership, our styles of leadership, our calling, our sense of personality, who we were. I was asking myself questions like, what is my life message? What is my purpose? What is it about me, my experiences, my gifting, my passions, which is unique, which is God's gift to me and to the world? Perhaps for the first time, I was kind of giving myself permission to think like this. I was reading verses like, delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. And for the first time, recognizing that the deep desires in me were God-given passions, something to be chased after, not simply ignored. One day in this course, I took part in a short coaching session with one of the members of staff. And at the start of it, she asked me, what would you like to talk about today? So I said I wanted to think about two of my twin passions, which seemed to conflict a little bit. They didn't seem to neatly weave together. One was my passion for frontier mission, and one was my passion for adventure and sport and life in the great outdoors. And I suppose in my mind, one seemed a more worthy spiritual pursuit, and the other seemed almost self-indulgent and selfish. In the course of the conversation, she asked me, when have you recently felt most vibrantly alive? And I explained to her my cycling holiday in Thailand and Cambodia, and how that in that time I really was alive. I loved it. It was fantastic. It was friendship, it was newness, it was adventure, it was exercise, it was superb. In the course of that conversation of dreaming about the future, I found myself articulating an idea I'd never thought before. I said that one thing I would love to do would be to gather a group of good friends and take them cycling around one of the countries in our region. Several reasons for this. One would be that it would just be a time of fun and friendship. Another would be that it would expose them to some of the needs in the region. And a third reason was that it would be a time of being shoulder to shoulder, bonding, thinking about life, and maybe using the metaphor of life as a journey. Almost immediately after articulating this idea for the first time, I just recognised that this really was a dream that I would love to do. Having verbalised it, I recognised that this is me. This is who I am. This is what I want to do. This is part of my unique passion. I think it's Irenaeus, a quote is attributed to, who said the glory of God is man or woman fully alive. God is glorified when I am vibrantly alive, and therefore the proverb, I should guard my heart because it's the wellspring of life. I should guard my passions and my dreams. And in articulating this idea of a cycling trip, I recognised that in some way those two passions I had for frontier mission and adventure weren't divorced from each other. They could perfectly be blended together in a way that would be unique and that would be part of my gift to the world. The next morning, I woke early to take the dogs for a walk. I went out of the front door and I saw that the gate was opened. Immediately, I was concerned and I went round to where my bike was locked up, and in the night, someone had broken through the gate, broken the chain on my bike and stolen my brand new bike. I could not believe it. I was gutted. I was close to tears. I was mad. I was furious. How can this be possible? But I was also so sad. I loved that bike. I had so many dreams of what I was going to do on that bike. I took the dogs for a walk. I was mad. I was throwing stones at trees. I was thinking, ah! And then suddenly, the light came on. It was like I recognised this isn't a coincidence. Only the day before, I'd been articulating this dream of taking a group of guys with my bike, cycling around a country in our region, and the very next morning, it's been stolen. It felt like such an obvious strategy almost, to take my idea, to snuff it out at its birth. And I realised there and then, in that moment, I was not going to give in to this ploy. Coincidence or not, I was not going to allow this to sway me from what felt like a real God-given dream. I almost laughed at the audacity, indeed the stupidity of this. I knew that God had already provided for that bike, and I knew that God could provide again. And I recognised in that moment I had a choice. I could either become discouraged and bitter, or I could persevere and believe God will provide again. This is a good dream from God. And so I resolved that's what I was going to do there and then. That day, we went into our leadership development course. As we drove in together, we resolved that we didn't want to sort of publicise this theft. Partly, I felt really bad for my friend who'd given the money. But to be honest, the real reason was I wanted to trust God that he would provide. I didn't want to somehow manipulate a situation where people felt sorry for me and gave. That morning, I was leading a prayer time in the group for our region, and I led the prayer time with this kind of grief inside. Later, we did share with some of the people in the course, and they prayed for us and prayed that God would provide, but we didn't sort of publicise it on social media or anything like that. And then 5 weeks later, we were at our regional staff conference. It was the final day of the conference, and a significant person in the region came up to me and spoke quietly into my ear and said, "Have you bought a new bike yet?" Now, I didn't know that this person even knew that my bike had been stolen, so I just simply replied, "No, not yet." The truth was I didn't have any money towards it, but I didn't say that. And then this person said, "Please can you email me your bank details because God told me to buy you a new bike." I couldn't believe it. Then they went on to say, "Buy a proper one. Don't buy a cheap one. Don't buy a second-hand one. Buy a really nice bike that you want. And you can spend £1,000 on it." I was blown away. Literally 5 weeks to the day after my lovely bike had been stolen, I was given the finances to buy a bike from a person that I hadn't even talked to about the bike. When I told Miranda, she said that she'd been praying for me and praying that God would actually provide through a significant person in our region, so that it would be an affirmation from the Lord to me that this was a dream, a passion from him, and that his favour was on it. So, in the days ahead, I was able to go out and buy a lovely bike. A bike that was a lot more than double the price of the previous one that had been stolen, which was far better than the old bike that had been broken. It was literally one upgrade after the other. Exactly 30 to 5 days after it had been stolen, I had the finances for another bike. Now, this story is not simply about provision, although it's a lovely story of provision. But really it's a story of God's affirmation of the blue flame, the passion in me that is unique, the thing that makes me different to other people. I recognised, even in that coaching conversation I had, that my love for adventure, for mission, are woven together. There's something in that which is an expression of who I am. It's part of my gift to the world. It's my blue flame. I saw as well that often those blue flames can be snuffed out when they're small flames that have just been lit. My bike was stolen the day after this idea, and it was almost like it was a conspicuous attack, if you like, on an idea. My blue flame was being snuffed out. It tells us in Matthew 12, verse 20, that Jesus, who is meek and lovely and gentle, does not break a broken bulrush or snuff out a smouldering wick. He fans them into flame. I've heard it said that when we go through really difficult times, times that feel like an attack on us, times that feel like times of real discouragement, something is taken from us, that can be an attack on the nature and character of God, because it causes us to question who God really is. So if I go through a time of ill health, I might be questioning, is God really my healer? Likewise, when we go through times that seem to touch us in our deepest place, they kind of attack our sense of identity, it can actually cause us to doubt ourselves. Am I really this person? Is this really what I'm going to do with my life? I realised that the theft of this bike, it was a moment like that. It could so easily have snuffed out my idea at birth. My idea literally could have been killed at conception. It may not even have ever come to birth. I'm so grateful that God provided. I'm so grateful that in doing that, he affirmed who I am. And even in telling this story, I realise that for many of us, things we go through in life, maybe it's negative words from other people. Maybe it's theft. Maybe it's the death of a vision. These things do steal and kill and destroy our blue flame. It's interesting that Jesus said that the enemy of good in this world comes to steal and kill and destroy. And so I want to encourage you today, even as you hear this story, this is a story. This was an Ebenezer moment for me. This was a moment when I knew God had helped me. God had provided for me. But know as well that God is a redeeming God. He redeems situations. When our blue flame, when our passion is stolen from us, when it is snuffed out early in its life, God can redeem. God can fan that flame back into a full, vibrant flame.